What's up, college sports fans? I'm Stucky.
I'm Colin Wilson.
I'm Mike Calabrese.
I'm Maria Marino.
I'm Charlie DiSturco, and we're excited that the Big Bets on Campus brand is launching its very own YouTube channel.
You'll be able to find every episode of the BBOC podcast, live shows, and other college sports content on this new channel.
Not only will the channel be dedicated to betting on college sports, but you'll also be able to find exclusive interviews with former college athletes,
college football power rankings,
and updates on other topics like the brand new College Football 25 video game series and the ins and outs of the recruiting trail all the way down to the transfer portal.
Whether you're into college football,
college basketball,
college baseball, or any of the college sports,
we are the home for college sports, and BBOC is the channel for you.
Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. I'll see you there.
Welcome into the Action Network podcast. We are presented by our friends at BetMGM. I'm your host today, Brendan Glasheen, joined by Sean Zerillo and Billy Ward. We are here for a UFC betting preview, UFC Fight Night, taking place at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas this coming Saturday, UFC 95, Vegas 95. We'll make our way through the card. Billy and Sean's Fight of the Night, underdogs, props, and best bets. We'll start with the main event on the card this week. Heavyweight fight between Marcin Tybura and Serghei Spivac. Sean Zerillo, when you take a look at the betting line, Spivac is the favorite, minus 170. Tybura plus 142. The round set at 3.5. What do you make of the matchup, and how would you like to bet it?
Yeah, this is a rematch from February of 2020. I believe it was the last, if not one of the last cards before we went into pandemic shutdown mode. Ended up coming back with those cards in Jacksonville, but this was a pick'em fight the first time. And Tybura ended up winning pretty comfortably by out-grappling Spivac. But now Spivac is 4 years older. He's in his physical prime. Tybura is 38, nearing the end of his career. And Spivac has also added 20 pounds of muscle since the first fight. Tybura had an 11-pound, 12-pound weight advantage in that first matchup, 246. Spivac was 234. Spivac has weighed in at 256 in his last two fights and looked much more muscular. He really filled out his frame physically, so I would expect him to be bigger and stronger than he was relative to the first fight, whereas Tybura may be declining a little bit physically. Now, we give heavyweights a lot of deference, even into their 40s, so I don't think Tybura is necessarily slowed down. I just think Spivac is stronger and better, and the better athlete relative to the first fight. Now, where does that help him? I'm not sure, because he had the better boxing in the first fight, and Tybura was trying to grapple in order to get it, out of danger for him. But the first two takedowns that Spivac gave up, he actually put himself on the ground. Tybura initiated the takedown, and then Spivac, I couldn't tell if he was going for a whizzer or if he was just trying to hip toss Tybura. But either way, both times he tried to use his weight and his leverage to get Tybura off of him or to get on top of Tybura, and he ended up putting himself once on his back, and then the second time he gave up his back, and Tybura took it. The third round takedown that Tybura got, he did lock his hands up against the cage and actually just muscle him down. And all three times that Spivac got put on his back, he had nothing to get up with. If Spivac lands takedowns here, I think Tybura can get up. If Tybura lands takedowns, I don't think Spivac gets up, just like the first fight. So, even though Spivac's the better striker, even though I think his takedown defense should be better than the first fight, he should be stronger than the first fight. And oh, by the way, this fight is in the Apex cage as opposed to a normal size octagon. So I think he should be able to use the fence to keep himself upright a little bit more as well. So I don't see Tybura having as much success with the grappling as he did in the first fight. I think Spivac should be the better striker, should be just a little bit quicker, even though I think both guys will land. So even though, this fight was a pick'em the first time, I get why Spivac has moved towards being the favorite. Younger, stronger, all the ways that he's probably improved relative to the first fight. And also I think the Apex cage helps him a little bit more too. That said, I still expect this to be another close and competitive fight that extends, where they spend time grappling or clinching against the cage. And I don't think either guy has particularly big power either. I don't think either guy is durable for the heavyweight division. I think they both have average to below average durability, but I also think they both have below average power for heavyweights. And even though they were both landing relatively clean in the first fight, neither was really hurting each other to a significant degree. I think one certainly could get a submission or get a finish down the stretch, as the other is potentially tiring. Tybura has only been in the championship rounds once in his career. Spivac has never been in his career, even though both have had main event bookings. So I'm not really sure how the cardio looks, over the final 7.5 minutes. But the over 3.5 rounds, I think, is the best way to bet this fight. They went to a decision pretty comfortably in the first fight. Nobody ever came close to finishing. I think they go at least 17.5 minutes here again. So the over 3.5 rounds, even it goes to decision at about plus 150, plus 170. I made it closer to plus 125. So I like either fighter to win by decision. I like another close and competitive decision. I just think Spivac is going to get the better of the striking and keep this up a little bit, standing a little bit more than the first fight. But the main threat to my bets, the main threat to the over 3.5, the main threat that goes to the decision, I think would be an early Spivac KO. So if you want to bet Spivac KO 1-2, Spivac KO 1, I think that's the likeliest way this finishes.
Over on the Action Network app, actionnetwork.com, and the UFC tab, Billy Ward puts out his UFC luck ratings, and those came out a couple days ago, Billy. And as Sean mentioned, the line has moved about 20 cents. Tybura is an underdog now in the plus 140 range. Has it become, and as you said a few days ago, it's a fairly valued line at the time. That's no longer the case. So are you tempted to take the dog here?
Yeah, I am, and I don't love it or feel great about it. It's kind of a weird situation where typically in rematches we like the fighter who won the first fight, but typically we also like the younger fighter. So those things kind of cancel out. Even if you look at their resumes since then, it's been weirdly similar. I believe Tybura is 7-2 since then. He's lost to Tom Aspinall and Alexander Volkov. Spivac is 6-2 since then. He's lost to Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gane. Gane and Volkov are one spot away from each other in the rankings, and they're fighting soon. Like, they've been almost the exact same guy. They both like to grapple now. Spivac didn't want to then, but he's kind of morphed into that a little bit in his recent fights. But yeah, it's one of those where if this were any other weight class and one guy was now 39, I'd be a little bit worried about a big change in how he performs. At heavyweight, can we say 39 isn't even his prime? Like, Randy Couture won his first title at 52 or however old he was. He wasn't really that old, I know, guys. But it's just not as big of a concern with heavyweight. You can't slow down when you were slow to begin with. You can only be so slow, and they seem to both be pretty close to as slow as you can be. So at plus 140, I like that on the Tybura side. I think, broadly speaking, the smaller cage tends to help the guy who's got the grappling edge. Sean makes some good points about using that defensively. Again, don't feel great about it, but plus 140 is a pretty big number. Seems like money's coming in on Spivac, though, so wait. Can you get plus 150? Can you get plus 160? And then last thing, Sean's point is we think it's going to be close enough to go to the 4th or 5th round. Just like we say with, our female 115-pound fights, if we think it's going to be really close and one person's an underdog, you're kind of logically, you want the bigger payout on that coin flip. So not my favorite bet. Don't especially want to see this fight necessarily, but yeah, I'll take the plus 140 payouts if I have to.
The last point I want to make towards the Tybura side of the underdog, his round where he wins should be clear. When he wins the round with grappling, it's going to be obviously his round. The striking rounds are going to be much closer to 50-50. Maybe 60-40 Spivac or 55-45 Spivac, but the striking rounds are going to be competitive, and I don't really see Spivac holding takedowns or getting position for long. If Tybura gets takedowns, I think it's his round. So that is just something to add to the underdog side. He may have one clear round in his favor. The other 4 rounds may be up for grabs. And at that point, you certainly want the underdog ticket.
Okay, very good. There's your main event breakdown, the heavyweight between Tybura and Spivac. Let's go to Sean and Billy's fight of the night. Featherweight matchup, Jose Mariscal and Damon Jackson. Latest betting line for you, Mariscal at minus 205, Damon Jackson plus 170, round set at 2.5. Sean, what do you make of this one, and where do you see an edge?
Jackson, 4 years older. He's getting in his late 30s, so for this division, getting a bit old, but I think he has both the grappling and the striking edge in this matchup. I think Chepe is the better athlete. I don't think he's an amazing athlete. I think he's an average athlete, where Jackson is below average athlete. And also Chepe is the much more durable fighter with better cardio. So down the stretch, Chepe takes over this fight pretty consistently, but I think Jackson gets out to a lead pretty consistently as well in round 1. Chepe could be grappled. He's shown regionally. He got out-grappled by strikers. Granted, it was a few years ago, but I think Damon Jackson is very tricky to fight against. He's very sticky. He has a lot of top pressure. He's really good at taking the back and locking in that body triangle. And I think he out-grapples or out-wrestles Chepe pretty consistently here in round 1. The question is whether he can maintain that for at least 10 minutes and then hang on for a decision in round 3. So Jackson pre-fight at about plus 185. Then I would live bet Chepe after round 1, take a little bit off of that position. And Jackson by decision at plus 500, I think is interesting as well, because I could see him getting control for 2 rounds and, doing enough over the first 2 rounds to get points to win a decision. As I said, I think he's even the better striker on the feet. I think he's more technical. Chepe throws more volume. He's a bit more active and just has more of that dog in him, right? He's not going to go away. He's probably not going to get finished. And I think he's going to be pouring it on Jackson down the stretch. So Jackson, as I said, Jackson moneyline pre-fight into a Chepe live bet. I could even see a draw in this fight. I think it's very possible that Jackson wins the first 2 rounds and then Chepe comes back and 10-8s him or finishes him in round 3. So I don't mind Billy's approach on the fight at all. I think we're both taking very logical approaches to how this fight plays out. But I think the Jackson pre-fight side is the side that you want your money on the money line perspective. And as I said, his decision prop at plus 500 seems like decent value as well.
I'm excited that we can clip Sean Zerillo saying he's got that dog in him.
He does though. Chepe, some fighters, their best skill is cardio and not dying. And Chepe, I believe, has never been finished, but he'll get knocked down and pop right back up. Like even when he gets hurt, he seemingly is not affected by it. So for judges' perspective, for showing the judges, hey, that shot didn't affect me, he gives really good body language to the judges. In a close decision, that can help you a lot. So I think that is absolutely worth considering. But yeah, the toughness, the cardio, those are his best skills. I think Jackson is the more talented fighter, but over the final 7.5 minutes, that might not matter.
Bill, you have similar thoughts where you might want to wait on Chepe, maybe later in the fight, there might be an edge?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it the same way. I just feel slightly more confident in Chepe where Sean likes Jackson a little bit. It's funny you mentioned the athleticism thing. I did the full fight breakdown here, and I think I put that Damon Jackson is the one featherweight that might make Mariscal look like a good athlete, right? Because when you look at him against other people, you're like, and again, I always have to say this, I mean by UFC standards, right? At your local CVS, these are the best athletes there. Compared to other UFC level featherweights, these are not great athletes, but I think Mariscal is a cut above Damon Jackson. Damon Jackson is featherweight Neil Magny at this point, right? Like he's the filtering between the rankings and just some guy. And it's a good role to be in, right? Like it's not an insult to use gatekeeper the way some people use it. It's a good spot. Like if you aren't one of the best guys in the world or one of the best 20 or 30 at the very least, you're not going to beat Damon Jackson. The thing I really like about Mariscal, and it speaks to him having that dog in him, he fought, it's either 7 or 8 future UFC competitors before he ever got to the UFC. He is not one of these like pampered pretty boy prospects that crushes cans until they get on the contender series. Like he was fighting the toughest dudes they had anywhere for, $800 at some random arena somewhere. So that really does speak to his heart, his determination. I think he's the better striker by virtue of that athleticism and that durability and that speed. The only spot I kind of disagree with Sean on is the grappling, which I think will be closer to even. I've got the grappling at even and Mariscal the better striker, where Sean's kind of one step down on each of those. He's a judo black belt. He's been doing judo forever. Mariscal briefly wrestled in college, doesn't have the credentials that Jackson does there. The thing about judo is you can lose via pin. If you're held down in judo for a certain amount of time and it's not a guard, that's an automatic loss. Those guys are good at getting off their back. So I have it even in that I don't think either guy is going to get that top position and do a ton with it because both are so good at getting back up. Which thus, who do you like more in the striking? That gives me Chepe. So I'm taking Chepe in round 3 or by decision at plus 140. If he gets a finish, I think it's attritional, other than like, a freak hip toss where Jackson plants his arm and breaks it like Jack Jenkins did. Obviously, you don't see that happening very often. That's not something you're going to bet on. So I could see an attritional stoppage down the stretch as that athleticism takes over, but that also covers the likelier option, which is Mariscal by decision, and you're getting plus money. So,
yeah, Jackson's had a couple of bad KO losses, and I think of him as this chinny fighter, but those losses were to Ilia Topuria and Dan Ige. Like those are 2 of the biggest punching featherweights. So maybe he's not so chinny, but I do think that, as you said, the attritional finish, the cardio down the stretch, if the finish comes, it's likely round 3.
As it pertains to underdogs, as we've mentioned before on this podcast, and we do these betting previews, we have a rundown, taking folks behind the curtain a bit. We have a rundown. We have a sheet that the guys fill out before we get going. And Billy kind of jumped on this first as far as an underdog is concerned. So, Billy, I'll let you go first and lead with your favorite underdog on the card.
Yeah, the other heavyweight fight on the card, arguably a much more exciting heavyweight fight. I've got Jonata Deniz at plus 175. For those that don't know his background, he's kind of like the heavyweight version of Alex Pereira, where he's coming in with a very, very extensive kickboxing background, has some, world or international level titles as a kickboxer. Not a ton of MMA experience. I believe 7 total fights, 5 before he got to the promotion, 1 in the Contender Series, 1 in the UFC proper. He's won them all by knockout. Only once has he gone to the second round. He's fighting Carl Williams, who is the exact opposite. Carl Williams is, for a big athletic dude who was I think tried out for the Olympics as a 100-meter dash, and the 100-meter dash, wrestled, at a high level, but just puts on the most boring, plotting fights. I'm just going to control you against the fence or get some takedowns and do nothing with it. It's kind of the inverse about what we talk about sometimes with fights we expect to go to a decision where we want the underdog. If one guy has finishing upside and one guy doesn't, if you can get the guy with the finishing upside at plus money, I'm going to take it. The worst case scenario for Deniz is probably he gets 3 chances to start each round on his feet and try to find a knockout, where Williams is just going to try to control him and not really hunt for finishes. And Deniz, against a at least athletically similar opponent in his last fight, kind of passed the test on the ground. He stayed safe. He got back to his feet. He's not going to submit anyone off his back or anything crazy, but if he can survive, that gives him enough opportunity to stand up and bang. Even if he's getting taken down and controlled for parts of the round, if he lands bigger shots on the feet, he could also just win the round on the judge's scorecard by doing more damage, which is kind of why I'm playing Deniz's money line and not just his knockout prop. That's what Sean's going to mention here in this spot, but I think the logic's pretty similar.
Carl Williams was a state champion in the 100-meter dash. This guy's 235 pounds. Yeah. Incredible. What an athlete. So I think Williams showed big concerns cardio-wise in his last fight against Tafa. He, as he typically does, kept getting takedowns, but Tafa was actually scrambling up, and it seemed like somebody making him work made Williams tire out. Now, Deniz was held down for an entire round by Austin Lane, who's a football player, not a wrestler. So I think that was extremely concerning for his prospects in this fight. He needs to make severe improvements, not only to the grappling, but also with his urgency to getting off of his back after he's taken down, because I'm pretty certain Williams is going to land takedowns here. The question is just whether Deniz tries to get up or not. But I think later in the fight, he's going to have opportunities regardless, because I think the takedowns will become tougher for Williams. If Deniz shows any resistance at any point of the first 2 rounds, I think the takedowns will eventually become tougher to get. And you saw Tafa hurt Williams and nearly put him away in the 3rd round. So I think Deniz could follow a pretty similar game plan. It is kind of the style he has had to fight through his MMA career, being the kickboxer, getting taken down, and just sort of waiting out rounds until he has opportunities to knock opponents out. I don't know how many opportunities he's going to get here. I don't know how much he's going to spend on his back. This could be a fight where he spends 14 and a half minutes on his back if Williams, fights the correct game plan. But Deniz KO, I think, is extremely live considering Williams' recklessness to some of his entries. He does shoot from pretty far away in the cage. And then also his gas and his chin in round 3. I think he's very capable of getting finished at some point by some heavyweight opponent who can actually show resistance in the grappling. So Deniz KO plus 335, I think was the best number I saw. Hopefully he tries to counter grapple a little bit, or at least scramble if he's taken down.
Only other thing on that one, it's kind of like a spectrum of risk reward here, where you can take the Deniz knockout is, the most high return, but Deniz in the finish only market is even money. And Carl Williams doesn't even try to finish people with takedowns. So if you want to make this a safe pick and, bet a little bit bigger, but maybe get it returned if it goes to a decision, you can get even money on Deniz finish only. And then Deniz's money line is kind of the midpoint in there. So it's really just, those all make sense to me. It's just a risk tolerance thing and how much you want to chase on this one versus what level of safety you want.
And speaking just to dogs overall, Sean, and Billy, you can weigh in on this too. You don't see a lot of value. It's only a 10 fight card, right? 6 on the main card, 4 prelims. There's not a whole lot of value as far as dogs this week.
There's two other dogs that I'm betting against in terms of finish props because I think they are the value on the money line side of the fight. That would be Jarno Aarons and Jarno Aarons against Yusuf Zalal, and then also Nikolai Veretnikov against Danny Barlow. We're going to get to those fights in a minute. I do think, though, the underdogs in both of those fights, from a pure money line perspective, are the value side. I would not lay chalk on the favorite, but there's only 10 fights on the card. We had a few cancellations. Not too many underdogs caught my eye, and the ones who did, I think I ended up betting against in terms of finish props. So yeah, Damon Jackson, the lone underdog in this card that really caught my eye. Denise, though, I'll be betting in the prop market.
Okay, let's head to props, Sean. Give them to us. What do you got?
Yeah, so the first of the two guys I mentioned, Yusuf Zalal against Jarno Aarons. Aarons was just promoted to blue belt. Yusuf Zalal is a brown belt who submitted a Gracie black belt in Billy Quarantillo in his last fight. Not only submitted him in the second round, nearly submitted him in the first round too after hurting him. And Zalal in his last, this is his second stint in the UFC. His last fight before coming back to the UFC, choked out an opponent too. I think this is a guy who's 25. He's coming into his own. He's recognized that he needs to change up his style a little bit in order to proactively finish opponents because he used to be more of a point fighter. And I think he has a severe grappling edge in this fight. I think he has a bigger grappling edge in this fight than he had in the last fight, like a significantly bigger grappling edge than he did in the last fight. So yeah, Zalal, as I said, the money line is blown out a little bit. If he gets caught in a striking fight with Jarno Aarons, Aarons is a very good striker and could absolutely outpoint him. But if he pursues the grappling edge, he should comfortably cover his price and also likely finish the fight. So Zalal by submission at plus 300. We're inside the distance at plus 200. And then Charlampos Grigororu, amazing name, against Toshiomi Kazama. Pretty binary fight, binary striker versus grappler fight. Kazama the grappler, Grigororu the striker, and I think he has bigger power. I don't like Kazama's chin. He's been knocked out on road to UFC. By the way, Kazama, road to UFC fighters in general, I think are pretty low level, and I'm generally looking to bet against them. And Charlampos is well-trained, one of my Long Island guys. I think he should have the power to hurt Kazama and put him away rather quickly. So Gregorio inside the distance at minus 120. I don't think Kazama is able to get this fight to the mat. He's going to get KO'd pretty quickly.
Billy, how about yourself in the prop market? Where do you see value?
Yeah, looking one that Sean has alluded to, and we'll also talk about a little bit with his best bet. But Danny Left Hand to God Barlow versus Veretnikov. Short notice fight for Veretnikov. He was supposed to get a second shot on the Contender Series this year after losing to Michael Morales a couple years ago. Got called up to this one. The interesting thing about Veretnikov's first appearance on the Contender Series against Michael Morales is he turned Michael Morales into a grappler. And we've seen Morales look really good since then, primarily with his striking. So that tells me that he's at least dangerous enough that he's making people feel that. Danny Barlow's nickname, I didn't make this up, it's Left Hand to God, all one word, and he just swings wild. He's landing like 9 significant strikes per minute, almost all of his wins by knockout. You know what he's trying to do. He is not being sneaky with his game plan. He is not going to confuse anyone with his intentions. We know the Danny Barlow method here. I think this will be a pretty violent striking match between both guys who can crack a little bit. Veretnikov, arguably a little bit more technical, but big discrepancy in speed, power, athleticism, all that stuff to Barlow. You can get this one to end in knockout. Either guy at minus 135. Sean's going to take kind of some similar angles here, some similar mentions. I think that's the way that covers the most ground without giving up something that I see is, or giving up too much of a price, I should say, while covering the most ground. I like Sean's angle too. I think we're seeing, broadly speaking, the same thing. It's kind of like we talked about with Denise. There's some risk-reward calculations here and how confident you feel on either guy.
And Sean, you can take it here from for best bets. You've got a flurry of ways to get in on Barlow.
Yeah, Barlow inside the distance at even money is my favorite way to bet this fight, but there's some alternate angles I think I may mess around with. I'm going to decide which ones I want to play. So first off, Barlow 4-inch reach advantage, Veretnikov on short notice. As Billy mentioned, he was going to fight for a second opportunity on Contender Series, and he's 33 years old. He's 4 years older in this fight. So he's 5 years older in this fight. He's 34. He's not some young prospect that the UFC is looking to sign, promote up the rankings quickly. He's a roster filler with a good record who's fought well regionally and hasn't been finished in 10 years. But Danny Barlow is different. And it's very difficult to cover minus 300 in a pure striking fight, which is why I said Veretnikov on the money line may be the side, because over 15 minutes, if he doesn't get finished, I think he's very likely to make this close and competitive. However, I think Barlow finishes him at a pretty high clip, and if he does, I think he does so early. This is a guy who's 5 of 8 wins in round 1, and his last fight against Josh Quinlan, Quinlan's a very durable fighter, he hit him with 95 significant strikes, and all of those were significant. I mean, he beat the crap out of Josh Quinlan, tripled him up on strikes, hit him a lot, and Quinlan wore the kind of damage where you watch it and you're like, I don't know how many fighters are taking this many power punches and surviving. So to me, Barlow KOs guys early more often than not, especially lower level, short notice replacements. I think he finishes guys on the lower rung of the MMA spectrum more often than not. I think his power is different. His size is a little different. And I think when he touches people, he's going to hurt them more than they're expecting to or more than they're used to. So his round 1 odds at plus 320, I think, are interesting. Obviously, I like the inside the distance at even money. But then also the unders, the under 1.5, the ends inside the distance at about plus 150 and minus 175, respectively. I think those might be solid bets as well. I know Billy's on the KO prop. I just like to protect against the club and sub, to a degree, if there's not a huge price discrepancy. But yeah, I think Barlow is a pure finisher and a guy who's going to continue to skyrocket up the rankings. They're going to keep matching him up well. But yeah, you see the finish record for Veretnikov. It hasn't happened in 10 years. I just think Barlow is different. And sometimes you just bet on the guys. I thought Tom Aspinall was different. Sometimes you bet on the guys you think are different athletes. I think Danny Barlow is a different athlete. So even money on his inside the distance prop, I don't think you're going to be getting that on against fighters of this level for very long. I think, if he KOs Veretnikov, if he fights another guy at Veretnikov's level, the KO line is going to be minus 200. So taking the price before I think it blows out in his future.
All right, and Billy will take us home. His best bet lands in the women's bantamweight over on the main card.
Yeah, more of a final bet than a best bet. I think Denise is probably my favorite play. But Chelsea Chandler at plus 125. She's fighting Yana Santos, used to be Yana Kunitskaya, now married to Thiago Santos. Yana Santos has not won a fight in a little bit over 3 years. Fought tougher competition, so it's a bit of a step down, as much as there is, in these weight classes that are a little bit thinner. Chelsea Chandler kind of on the come up a little bit, 2-1 in the UFC, good grappling, a little bit more athletic. The thing I noticed here, though, is this line moved pretty heavily towards Santos just because she posted a picture on Instagram of her looking kind of jacked, which to me is not like good handicapping because, she looked kind of shredded before a fight. Cool. But she's also probably well past her prime. Had a kid a couple years ago. Chandler is basically just now becoming a full-time pro fighter within the last year or two, which is something I like to look at. These people that were probably working other full-time jobs and kind of just training and fighting in the evenings or whatever, they get that UFC deal. They make enough money that they can kind of do this all the time. I expect a little bit more improvement from her than I do from Santos at this point in her career. Wish there was more of an age gap here. Chelsea Chandler, despite being pretty new in her career, is 33. I think like 6 months younger than Santos, a year younger than Santos, something like that. Don't love that, but at plus money, plus it's also a fight that we think probably goes to a decision more often than not. We got an underdog on one side. Again, not a bet I'm running out and to the bank to make a huge withdrawal to make, but I do like it at plus money.
Yeah, what is that fight like? Minus 400, minus 450 to go to a decision? It's very juiced up. One of the more juiced up fights you'll see in the Apex. Minus 300. There is another women's fight on the card though, I believe, that has a minus 400 goes to decision prop. So
yeah, Hosa and Panny.
Hosa and Panny Kansad. Yeah, minus 450, which might be the most juiced GTD prop I've seen in an Apex fight because, as we know, the Apex fights end inside the distance about 15% more often than your typical cage, but also nobody's finishing any fights this year with the new gloves, so maybe it doesn't even matter. 15% of nothing is still nothing.
I thought about that one too, as with the similar logic. I just don't. I don't think Panny has the skill set to make this look as close, where Carol Hosa's very active, very athletic. And then the female opener fight, I'll mention that one too. Another rematch that probably nobody asked for because they had a draw in the Contender Series. If you want to take Alencar pre-fight and then just wait till you get plus money on Luciano or whatever we're calling her, because they both have 7 names, and just get plus money on both sides, I think that's probably going to be there. Alencar, as much as I like to tease jiu-jitsu people, like 6-time world champion, really good for a round, but it takes her 20 takedowns to get one, and then she gets tired and you can take her opponent. So that's I don't want to have a position on that fight, but I think it's a pretty easy way to end up with plus money tickets on both women.
Yeah, I might just wait for a live bet on Luciano, but I think she's the clear live side.
All right, very good. There you go. Your UFC betting preview for Vegas 95 at the Apex. 6 on the main card and 4 prelims. It all gets started on the ESPN family of networks. 4 o'clock Eastern for the prelims, 7 o'clock Eastern for the main card. For Billy Ward and Sean Zerillo, be sure to find those guys in the free award-winning Action Network app. Also, all of the UFC betting content over on the app. Also, actionnetwork.com. For Billy and Sean, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for tuning in to another UFC betting preview here on the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. Best of luck, and we'll talk to you again next week.